a friend of mine directed me to a great piece that an Orthodox apologist put out. My friend Gordon, and you can I'll go ahead and I'll post this hopefully later on my blog. It's a wonderful piece, and I think it's interesting that the two ancient branches of Christianity are both in the same mindset on this topic, on the same wavelength. I'm going to read a section from an Orthodox apologist, as he puts it, and I think he puts it in a fantastic manner. He says, the oldest Christian church yet discovered, dating to about AD 233, and of course images of this church are readily available to be viewed over the internet. We read, though they are in some rough condition, several examples of early Christian iconography are preserved within the church. On the wall near the baptismal font, there is an icon of Christ as a good shepherd, with Adam and Eve below the figure. On the south wall of the baptistry are icons of Saint Faudonai, better known as the woman at the well. And to the left of that, an image of the prophet King David's fight with Goliath. On the north wall of the baptistry are an illustration of the healing of the paralytic and a depiction of Christ and Saint Peter walking on water. A large icon below these depicts three women, probably the Virgin Mary, Saint Mary Magdalene, and Saint Salome, walking towards what appears to be a tomb, probably a depiction of the cave in which Christ's body was placed after the crucifixion. And the Christians of the city weren't the only ones whose house of worship had lots of images. The Jewish synagogue discovered at Dura Europos, the construction of which was probably finished in around the mid-200s, is filled nearly top to bottom with ornate iconographic depictions of Old Testament events and figures. Throughout the dozens of icons present in the synagogue are images of prophets such as Moses, David, Ezekiel, Elijah, and Abraham. Symbols such as a menorah and the Torah scroll, and depictions of events such as the near sacrifice of Isaac, and Moses' reception of the Ten Commandments. The synagogue at Dura Europos, though a very striking example because of its excellent preservation, is by no means unique in the ancient world. Do not listen to this and think, oh, you know what, this must have been an exception. It is not. This author is correct. It is by no means unique, and we will see that later as we continue this debate. There are many more synagogues with much more iconographic art which archaeologists have discovered and are still in the process of discovering. Excuse me. The abundance of images in these synagogues is especially important to our current purposes as it significantly undermines one of the key pillars of the theory that early Christians were hostile to images, namely the assumption, which passed unquestioned for quite some length of time, that the early Judaism from which Christianity emerged was aniconic and even iconophobic. Clearly the opposite was true. Christianity emerged from and grew up alongside a Judaism with a vibrant iconographic tradition. Christianity emerged from and grew up alongside a Judaism with a vibrant iconographic tradition. The statements of early Christians writing against idolatry have been interpreted in the context of this false assumption by many for some time. But with this new archaeological evidence, including both the synagogue and the church of Dura Europos, new interpretations are necessary. Not to mention, and this is my addition, not to mention the incredible monumental evidence the bar has put out. Amazing evidence of ancient images dating back to the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and even 4th century. Continuing, the textual evidence cannot continue to be interpreted in a vacuum, but now must be interpreted alongside and within the context of the archaeological evidence. Why would the early Christians have spent so much time and effort arguing so vehemently against the idolatry of the pagans, while remaining silent about the idolatry, assuming they considered it to be so, rising up in their midst? Early Christian apologists simultaneously railed against the images of the pagans, while attending worship services in churches with images. The only plausible explanation for how to reconcile these two facts is that they must not have considered their own images to be idolatrous. Additionally, early Christian apologists never shy about criticizing the Jews for any of even the slightest perceived transgressions. If the widespread use of images in the synagogues was viewed by them as idolatrous, why did they never take the opportunity to attack the Jews for this? Why instead does it seem that early Christians, in fact, picked up their art forms and styles from the Jews? Contrary to the former allegations of Calvin and his faithful disciples, the introduction of icons into the churches was not the result of later pagan influence upon a weaker church, but was part of the early Jewish inheritance assumed by the new Christian faith in its first centuries. These are questions and conundrums that, because the evidence was unavailable until fairly recently, never occurred to earlier Protestant proponents of iconoclasm, like Calvin, and which iconoclasm's modern proponents have yet to sufficiently answer or explain. But these are questions which demand an answer if their views are going to continue to be taken seriously in the light of modern archaeological evidence. Anywhere you turn, and I mean anywhere, in ancient Judaism or ancient Christianity, the proper usage of images as objects of religious veneration was always accepted. So where will Protestantism turn? No doubt it will probably continue evolving, changing the teachings that were available, that were there for the early Christians, teachings that were so prominent in the early church. So where will Protestantism turn? It is clear that we can remove the Old Testament from the category of iconophobic proofs, since the Old Testament has clearly condemned idolatry, but not the proper usage of images within churches of worship. What about the ancient church? The early church is ripe with proof that the early Christians had no problem worshiping with images around them, or even on the very instruments that housed what they worshipped. What about Talmudic or Rabbinic Judaism? Well, as Jacob Milgram puts it, not much later, and about the time the Dura synagogue came into being, the Palestinian Talmud records a grudging recognition of Jewish art. In the days of Rabbi Jochanan, men began to paint pictures on the walls, and he did not hinder them. And in the days of Rabbi Abun, men began to make designs of mosaics, and he did not hinder them. To the above passages, we still add another, Targum Pseudo-Jonathan on Leviticus 26:1. This Aramaic translation first paraphrases the prohibition against making idols and graven images, and such figures in stone as men bow down to. Then the text makes an exception. But a stone column carved with images and likenesses you may make upon the premises of your sanctuaries, but not to worship them. The text makes an exception. You can make a stone column carved with images and likenesses on the premises of your sanctuaries, where you worship, but don't worship them. At last, we hear the correct application of this commandment. The early church knew the correct application. Early Judaism knew it. And we hope after this debate is done, we hope many people will understand the mindset of the early church and just why Catholicism has the images of the saints, of angels, and so many others in our churches. And I will now conclude my opening statement. Thank you.